Class, let's discuss the concept of human culture. Let's define it first. Very simply, culture is the entire way of life of society. Now, society is the people, and culture is their way of life. E.B. Tyler, the great anthropologist, said this: culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by humans as members of society. He said, no particular way of life is natural to humanity, even though most people around the world view their own behavior that way. Have you ever heard of culture shock? It's a disorientation due to the inability to make sense out of an unfamiliar way of life. It often occurs when you travel to a different part of town, sometimes in a large city. You're not accustomed to the extravagance and wealth in one part, or you're not accustomed to the extreme poverty in another part of town. And very often, culture shock occurs when you travel to foreign countries, different from your own. The Yanomama live in villages scattered along the border of Venezuela and Brazil. Their way of life could not be more different from our own. And there is a video about them, and I'll post that video for you to watch separately. Ethnocentrism is one of our primary concepts when talking about culture, and it refers to judging another culture by the standards of one's own culture. So it is similar to racism, prejudice, discrimination, ethnocentrism, judging another culture by the standards of one's own culture. What you should be doing instead of ethnocentrism in most instances is cultural relativism, which refers to judging another culture by its own standards. So, should we always practice ethnocentrism? Well, sometimes it is relative because sometimes we have to be ethnocentric in a sense, because what if the people are tossing their babies to crocodiles or dedicating a young girl to the gods and throwing her into the volcano? And in an instance like that, maybe we would not agree with their culture. But basically, for the most part, if it doesn't violate some very moral standard, then we should be culturally relativistic and judge that culture by their own standards, not by our own standards. Now, have you ever heard of the sacred rock? The sacred rock, this story comes from an Indian anthropologist named Chandra Thapar. He made a study of foreign culture which had customs similar to those of his native land. One culture in particular fascinated him because it reveres one animal as sacred, much as the people in India revere the cow. The tribe Dr. Thapar studied is called the Asu and is found on the American continent north of the Tarahumara of Mexico. Though it seems to be a highly developed society of its type, it has an overwhelming preoccupation with the care and feeding of the rock, an animal much like a bull in size, strength, and temperament. In the Asu tribe, it is almost a social obligation to own at least one, if not more, rocks. Anyone not possessing at least one is held in low esteem by the community because he is too poor to maintain one of these beasts properly. Some members of the tribe, to display their wealth and social prestige, even own herds of rocks. Have you heard of rocks? Well, they have herds of rocks. Unfortunately, the rock breed is not very healthy and usually does not live more than 5 to 7 years. for it has a tendency to throw its shoes often. There are rock specialists in each community, perhaps more than one if the community is particularly wealthy. These specialists, however, due to the long period of ritual training they must undergo and to the difficulty of obtaining the right selection of charms to treat the rock, demand costly offerings whenever a tribesman must treat his ailing rock. Now, at the age of 16 in many ASU communities, the youths undergo a puberty rite in which the rock figures prominently. The youth must petition a high priest in a grand temple. He is then initiated into the ceremonies that surround the care of the rock and is permitted to keep a rock. Although the rock may be used as a beast of burden, it has many habits which would be considered by other cultures as harmful to the life of the society. In the first place, the rock breed is increasing at a very rapid rate, and the ASU tribesmen have given no thought to limiting the rock population. As a consequence, the ASU must build more and more paths for the rock to travel on, since its delicate health and its love of racing other rocks at high speeds necessitates that special areas be set aside for its use. The cost of smoothing the earth is too costly for any one individual to undertake, so it has become a community project, and each tribesman must pay an annual tax to build new paths and maintain the old. There are so many paths needed that some people move their homes because the rock paths must be as straight as possible to keep the animal from injuring itself. Dr. Thapar also noted that excrement of the rock cannot be used as either fuel or fertilizer. On the contrary, its excrement is exceptionally foul and useless, totally useless. Worst of all, the rock is prone to stampedes, in which it runs down anything in its path, much like stampeding cattle. Estimates are that the rock kills thousands of the ASU in a year. Now, despite the high cost of its upkeep, the damage it does to the land, and its habit of destructive stampedes, the ASU still regard the rock as being essential to the survival of their culture. A member of the Panchayat, or village council, in Chandra Thapar's home village, has done experiences with the Planned Parenthood campaign in rural India. He suggests that the only rational thing for the ASU to do would be to begin a program of birth control for the rock. He feels that his village should send a technical assistance team to advise the ASU in limiting the rock population. Now, critics of the Panchayat members suggest that he should not offer such assistance, given the Indian reverence of the cow. However, he suggests that the rock and the cow should not be compared because the cow contributes much to the Indian way of life, whereas the rock kills, maims, and upsets the life and environment of the ASU. Our conclusion: the rock is dysfunctional, and this is a dysfunctional society. So what is the rock? Have you guessed yet? What is the rock spelled backwards? Ah, the car, the automobile. Is it a symbol of social status? Yes, it is. Is it about the size of a large bull? Yes, some are slightly larger, but small cars are about the size of a bull. And puberty rite? Yes, when you're 16, 15 and a half, you take your driver's ed course and so on, and you begin to learn about the care and feeding of the rock, how to pump gas into it. And the foul and useless excrement? Yes, the carbon dioxide is very nasty, and it kills thousands of ASU annually, and these stampedes are car wrecks. So yes, the conclusion is these things called cars, maybe they are dysfunctional in many ways. Can this give you an idea of how to look at your own society from someone else's perspective? So in the world's low-income countries, most children must work to provide their families with needed income. So is it ethnocentric for people living in high-income nations to condemn the practice of child labor? Good question. I mean, it's just a different culture. We think it's wrong to make children, young children work. These girls are about 12 years old, and they're carrying these heavy bricks on their heads. Other children, they work in the fields and so on. Don't even go to school at all. Is that wrong? Or is it okay in their culture? So these are good questions. Back to the India situation with the cow. Cattle in India do produce a lot of milk. In fact, they get more protein from milk from their cows than you would get from eating a cow's meat. So that's pretty good. Also, they are allowed to eat the meat if a cow dies of an accidental death or natural cause. They can eat the meat. And the cattle in India, their chips, you know what cow chips are, the manure is used as fertilizer. And if it's dried, they use it for fuel, for cooking, and other uses, for heat in their homes. So the cattle in India are quite functional for them. This picture is in Nepal. Now here we have the 100% American. The 100% American. There can be no question about the average American's Americanism or his desire to preserve his precious heritage at all costs. Nevertheless, some insidious foreign ideas have already wormed their way into his civilization without his realizing what was going on. Now, bear in mind, this was written in, I think, 1937 by an anthropologist in the United States. So some of the terminology may be old, 1937, but you'll get the general idea. Now, this American, 100% American, is muffled to the ears in un-American materials. Cotton, first domesticated in India. This was his pajamas, okay? Linen, domesticated in the Near East. Wool, from an animal native to Asia Minor. Or silk, whose uses were first discovered by the Chinese. All these substances have been transformed into cloth by methods invented in southwestern Asia. If the weather is cold enough, he may even be sleeping under an eider-down quilt invented in Scandinavia. On awakening, he glances at the clock, a medieval European invention, uses one potent Latin word in abbreviated form, rises in haste, and goes to the bathroom. Oh, the bathroom. Here, if he stops about it, he must feel himself in the presence of a great American institution. He will have heard stories of the lack of quality and infrequency of foreign plumbing, and will know that in no other country does the average person perform his ablutions, his cleansing rituals, in the midst of such splendor. But the insidious foreign influence pursues him even here. Glass was invented by the ancient Egyptians, the use of glazed tiles for floors and walls in the Near East, porcelain in China, and the art of enameling on metal by Mediterranean artisans of the Bronze Age. Even his bathtub and toilet are but slightly modified copies of Roman originals. The only purely American contribution to the ensemble is the steam radiator, against which our patriot very briefly and unintentionally places his posterior. If you don't know what a steam radiator is, it was in buildings years ago, there's still some around. You had a boiler in the basement that boiled water. The steam rose through pipes, and it circulated through pipes throughout the building. And in each room, there was a steam radiator. In a certain way, the steam came through the pipes, and the heat was radiated from the hot air, the hot steam, the hot water, radiating heat into the room. It was very effective. Then as the steam loses its heat, it turns back into water, goes back down to the boiler, and is reheated. So it's a circular system, a very ingenious system, but it's no longer used. There are other more cost-effective ways of doing it, I suppose. In this bathroom, the American washes with soap, invented by the ancient Gauls. Next, he cleans his teeth, a subversive European practice, which did not invade America until the latter part of the 18th century. He then shaves, which is a masochistic rite first developed by the heathen priests of ancient Egypt and Sumer. The process is made less of a penance by the fact that his razor is made of steel, an iron carbon alloy discovered in either India or Turkestan. Lastly, he dries himself on a Turkish towel. Returning to the bedroom, the unconscious victim of un-American practices removes his clothes from a chair, invented in the Near East, and proceeds to dress. He puts on close-fitting, tailored garments whose form derives from the skin clothing of the ancient nomads of the Asiatic steppes, or steppes, and fastens them with buttons whose prototypes appeared in Europe at the close of the Stone Age. Are you following the chart? This costume is appropriate enough for outdoor exercise in a cold climate, but is quite unsuited to American summers, steam-heated houses, and Pullmans. Nevertheless, foreign ideas and habits hold the unfortunate man in thrall, even when common sense tells him that the authentically American costume of G-string and moccasins would be far more comfortable. He puts on his feet stiff coverings made from hide, prepared by a process invented in ancient Egypt and cut to a pattern which can be traced back to ancient Greece, and make sure that they are properly polished, also a Greek idea. Lastly, he ties about his neck a strip of bright-colored cloth, which is a vestigial survival of the shoulder shawls worn by 17th century Croats. He gives himself a final appraisal in the mirror, an old Mediterranean invention, and goes downstairs to breakfast. Ah, breakfast. Here a whole new series of foreign things confronts him. His food and drink are placed before him in pottery vessels, the popular name of which, China, is sufficient evidence of their origin. His fork is a medieval Indian invention, and his spoon a copy of a Roman original. He will usually begin the meal with coffee, an Abyssinian plant first discovered by the Arabs. The American is quite likely to need it to dispel the morning after effects of overindulgence in fermented drinks invented in the Near East, or distilled ones invented by the alchemists of medieval Europe. Whereas the Arabs took their coffee straight, he will probably sweeten it with sugar, discovered in India, and dilute it with cream. Now cream, both the domestication of cattle for milk and the technique of milking have originated in Asia Minor. If our patriot is old-fashioned enough to adhere to the so-called American breakfast, his coffee will be accompanied by an orange, domesticated in the Mediterranean region, a cantaloupe, domesticated in Persia, or grapes, domesticated in Asia Minor. He will follow this with a bowl of cereal, made from grain, domesticated in the Near East, and prepared by methods also invented there. From this, he will go on to waffles, a Scandinavian invention, with plenty of butter, originally a Near Eastern cosmetic. As a side dish, he may have the egg of a bird, domesticated in Southeastern Asia. Isn't that an egg? Yes. A chicken egg. And he may have strips of the flesh of an animal, also domesticated in Southeastern Asia, a pig, which may have been salted and smoked by a process invented in Northern Europe. Breakfast over, he places upon his head a molded piece of felt, invented by the nomads of Eastern Asia, that is his hat. And if it looks like rain, puts on outer shoes of rubber, discovered by the ancient Mexicans, and takes an umbrella invented in India. He then sprints for his train, the train, not the sprinting, being an English invention. At the station, he pauses for a moment to buy a newspaper, paying for it with coins invented in ancient Lydia. Once on board, he settles back to inhale the fumes of a cigarette invented in Mexico, or a cigar invented in Brazil. Meanwhile, he reads the news of the day, imprinted in characters invented by the ancient Semites, by a process invented in Germany upon a material invented in China. As he scans the latest editorial, pointing out the dire results to our institutions of accepting foreign ideas, he will not fail to thank a Hebrew God in an Indo-European language that he is a 100% decimal system invented by the Greeks, American, from Americus Vespucci, an Italian geographer. So how American are Americans anyway? I think Americans are a hodgepodge of other nations. All societies contain cultural differences that can provoke a mild case of cultural shock. So these ladies may be wondering about each other. In fact, these two as well, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. The other one says everything uncovered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. Something to think about. So now we're going to look at the elements of culture. Every culture has these 5 elements. Every culture has these 5 elements. So if you're traveling through the galaxy and you're discovering different planets, they have civilizations with cultures, all of them will have gone through these 5 elements. First is symbols. Every culture has symbols. Humans transform elements of the world into symbols. Symbols now are anything that carries a particular meaning recognized by the people who share a culture. Remember, society is the people, culture is their way of life. So we share a way of life, and symbols are the way that we communicate with each other. Symbols carry meaning. Societies create new symbols all the time. And the reality for humans is found in the meaning that things carry with them. Meanings vary within and between cultures. A star means something in one culture, but something entirely different in another culture. So here are some symbols. A flag, the American flag, for some people might mean justice, freedom, and liberty. And for other people, it might mean domination or something like that. And maybe they were at war one time in Japan. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Japan. And regardless of whether you believe that was justified, look at the Japanese viewpoint, and they may not treasure the American flag as much. Then the donkey and the elephant, Republicans and Democrats. The skull and crossbones, those are symbols. The peace symbol, the lucky symbol there of the clover, and the dove, peace, and maybe the symbol of the Holy Spirit. The cross, the green symbol there for recycling. So lots of other symbols here. So they're not universal. They're always specific to a given culture. And they can be icons, images, gestures. You can use hand motions, sign language, and so on. And they can be just tangible things that you have. Your cell phone is a symbol to other people that you are cool or something, that you're connected. The wedding ring, look at that diamond engagement ring there. So that could be a symbol, a handicap symbol. Apple, what is a symbol of? Well, Steve Jobs said that the apple was exactly what the Bible says it was, a symbol of original sin. He said, we're rebels, we're different. We try to come up with new ideas and break with tradition. But he did say it was from original sin. That's from Eve taking the bite out of the fruit in the Garden of Eden. So languages, that's our number 2 element. All cultures have language. Language is a system of symbols. So if you have symbols, language combines symbols into a system. Language is a system of symbols that allows people to communicate with one another. Largely, these are verbal. They're also written. But there can be sign language. There can be smoke signals. There can be the Morse code, tapping sounds, and so on. There are lots of languages. So a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings by the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or marks, having understood meanings. So here the English word read is written in 12 of the thousands of languages humans use to communicate with one another. So here are some different ways of writing the word read, okay? In la air. So elements of culture. So language actually is passed down from one generation to the next through cultural transmission, the passing on of culture from one generation to the next. So it takes place largely through language. Language then is a system of symbols. Now, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf had a hypothesis about language. They said we can understand the world only in terms that our language provides. If we don't have a language, then we're not so intelligent, are we? We can't really understand the world that we live in without language. It helps us interpret what we see. And so language shapes the way we think, determines what we can think about. Benjamin Whorf said that. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is very good, and so it behooves us then to study different languages. Perhaps the more languages we learn, the better understanding we have of the world, because language is inseparable from our culture. So when you learn another language, I was a Spanish minor in college, and we learned a lot about different Spanish cultures and so on. So it's very interesting. So what do you call someone who speaks two languages? Ta-da-da. Bilingual. Okay. I think you got it right, right? What do you call someone who speaks three languages? Well, you call them trilingual. Usually we call it multilingual, three or more languages, multilingual. What do you call someone who speaks one language? Ah, that's an American. Many Americans, if not most Americans, do not speak other languages, but most people in other countries speak more than one language. So we are the ones who need to learn other languages. I think it would help us learn and understand other people better. Chinese is the most spoken language in the world. 20% of the world population speaks Chinese. 20% of the world's population. English, only 5.52% is the native tongue. So much of the world speaks English. See the light blue areas? The light blue areas, most of it's a second language, a widely spoken second language, those light blue areas. But the dark blue areas, Australia, there's some areas in Africa, see Nigeria and so on. Of course, England and Ireland and Scotland. In North America, only 5.52% of the world's population is English, the native tongue or official language. But in all these, in Russia, they teach English in school, and many countries, English is the language used in school. And so in India and so on. So it is widely spoken second language, but only 5.52% is it their main #1 language. And Spanish is also widely spoken, and that's the official language in many countries. What about Brazil? What's their language? Yes, you're right. Portuguese is their language. So not all of South America speaks Spanish. And so let's look at values in our next video.